On July 11, 2017, we announced our next version of the IBM Copy Services Manager, which is our 6.2.0 release. This release is going to GA on July 14, 2017. In this video, I want to show you some of the major features that we've added to the 6.2.0 release. This list gives you a high-level overview of what I'm going to talk about in the video, and as you can see, there are a large number of new features. Copy Services Manager, we develop in an agile environment, so as we get in new requests from the field, we try to do our best to implement what we can. So a lot of these features that you see are driven by customer requests. So with no further ado, let me go on and talk about the new features. Alright, so the first one I want to talk about is our support for exporting and syncing certificates for remote connections. So when CSM gets installed on a system, a certificate is created by default. That certificate can be used by the external API callers so that a secure connection is formed. For example, when you set up the DS8000 to use CSM for remote LDAP authentication, a certificate is necessary so that the DS8000 can talk to the CSM server. And so this, we've tried to make it a little easier. Before you had to go onto the operating system itself, extract a certificate, and then put it onto the DS8000. And so, especially if CSM is running on the DS8000 HMC, where you don't have access to the operating system, this could be quite cumbersome. In other cases where you aren't, you still have to go to the operating system and pull it down. So we've added two new features that we hope will help in some of the setup. First one is on the Advanced tab panel, we have added an export button. So in the little picture you see below there, see Export Trust Store for remote connections. This will allow you to export that certificate file to wherever your browser is located, so that when you set up the DS8000 via probably the DS CLI or possibly the DS GUI, you can import that certificate without having to muck with the operating system that CSM is installed on. The second feature for this is we added the ability to synchronize that certificate across multiple CSM servers. So as I mentioned, when we install CSM, a certificate gets created. Well, this means that every CSM server has a unique certificate. This becomes a problem when you're setting up something like the DS8000 LDAP authentication, because it only allows you to enter one certificate, so all the servers have to have the same certificate. So to make this easier, we have the synchronize button. You push the synchronize button, it's going to ask for the IP, the username, and password of another CSM server, and once you click OK, it's going to synchronize those certificates, the certificate of the server you're doing it on, with the server that you pointed it to. Now you can do this for multiple CSM servers if you need multiple redundant CSM systems. But hopefully now you don't have to mess with copying and pasting those certificates over in the different servers. Alright, next feature I want to talk about is our support for user-defined group names on our CSM sessions. This one came about because they had customers that they were managing hundreds of sessions in their environment, all kind of different sessions, although they had subsets where some of the sessions had common characteristics. They might be part of a common set of host systems or some other common application. And so when they looked at the session overview panel, we listed out a table with hundreds of sessions, and it made it difficult for them to kind of manage those subsets together. And so what we've added was the ability to, on a CSM session, you can define your own user-defined group name. You can type in whatever you want, give it a unique name, and do this for multiple sessions, so that now you basically have a grouping of your sessions. To do this, you'd select the session and then call do session actions, set user-defined group name, and then type it in or select one of the existing ones that have already been created, and you're set to go. Now, where does this show? On that table, we have a new column called group name. So on that column, you can sort the table by that column, or make it easier to view it. Or you can also use that group name and type it into the filter for that table. You'll see there's a little filter box right above the table. If that filter box will take the group name. So as in the picture you're seeing there, we're only showing those sessions that have that group name in common there. So hopefully this makes it a little easier for customers that do manage hundreds of sessions or several sessions that expand the length of the table, and thus they can manage it and monitor those sessions a lot easier. Alright, the next one I want to talk about is our advanced editing of LDAP configurations within our GUI. So LDAP can be quite complex. It's very adaptable to different customer environments, and because of that, customers have different ways to set it up. So we've tried to make the LDAP setup wizard in CSM as simple as possible, but there have been cases where it just didn't work, and customers had to go to support and get help, and then the support had problems because they had to extract the LDAP XML file that was on the operating system, help the customer change it, and then have the customer reapply it, which is a long process. So what we've done is in the LDAP configuration wizard, we still have the basic tab, and we've fixed a number of defects in it, so hopefully the basic tab still works. But in the event that you do have a unique situation with LDAP, we have this advanced tab now where we actually display the XML file and its contents within the GUI, the CSM GUI itself. So now we have a little editor there. You can manually edit it. If support tells you what to edit, you can change that. You can issue the test. It's going to test the configuration, then you can save it. And so this editor also has like syntax highlighting, so if you type things wrong and the syntax is off, you will be get a little highlighted and a little notification there on the side of the next to the line numbers if there's a problem. So we're hoping this helps a lot of customers that have had LDAP configuration issues. Though again, I want to state that we have made a number of improvements just in the basic wizard, so that hopefully a lot of these cases are not needed as much. Alright, the next feature is that for CSM installations that are done on a ZOS system, we've removed the requirement to start the IWNAUTH address space. So previously by default you had to start the address space. However, all that server is for is for LDAP authentication. We don't use it for anything else. And so there were a lot of ZOS customers that said, well, why do I need this? I don't use LDAP, I use something like RACF, which was a valid concern because it could take up, even though it didn't take up much resources, it did take up some of the system resources. And so we would tell customers they could not start it or turn it off. However, LDAP itself was set up on the CSM server by default, and so what would happen is when they go into the add user menu and they chose to look up a user, we would still try to hit the IWNAUTH server, and if that server is down, we present a little error, a little warning basically that says we couldn't talk to the LDAP auth server. And so even though we pulled up the RACF users, customers didn't like that little warning. And so we disabled LDAP by default on ZOS. You no longer have to do the IWNAUTH server, and hopefully customers are set to go. Now, with that said, there are customers that run on ZOS that do want LDAP, and with that you can actually re-enable it. There's some steps there. We document you can enable it and start up that address space, and you'll be fine. Alright, so this next one I want to talk about is one of our bigger features that customers have been asking for. It's hard to explain, so I basically called it support for managing ZOS HyperSwap across multiple sessions with different session types, thus asymmetric configurations within the same sysplex. Alright, what does that mean? So that basically means that there are customers that wanted to have all of their Metro Mirror relationships in their local site highly available, which means they wanted them HyperSwap capable. However, not all of those volumes, those production volumes, had to be replicated to the remote site. So the problem was that you could only set up HyperSwap previously on a single session within a sysplex, and thus if you needed some of those pairs, at least any number of those pairs to be replicated to the third site, you would have to use a 3-site solution like Metro Global Mirror or multi-target MMGM, and thus you would need to allocate volumes for even the pairs that you didn't need to get replicated to that third site within that MGM session. So now what we do, we're allowing a customer to configure multiple sessions. So for example, a regular Metro Mirror 2-volume session and a 3-site session, Metro Global Mirror multi-target MMGM session, and set them up so that they're tied together, and thus when when both sessions are ready to enable HyperSwap, we load the configuration for the MM pairs of both those sessions into ZOS. So now you have multiple sessions. They have different configurations. One's a 2-site, one's a 3-site, but both have HyperSwap capable pairs within that same sysplex. So if a HyperSwap event occurs, or you issue a HyperSwap by command, both the sessions are, you can support more than 2, but all the sessions that are set up tied together do end up swapping. So how do we do that? We try to make it fairly simple. When you go into the session under session actions, you will now see a set consistency group name for on each of the sessions. What that does, well, we had that before for Global Mirror in the previous release. Well, we've extended this for the Metro Mirror role pairs within a session, so that you can specify a name, which is a max of 12 characters, and that name is what you would use and set in common with the other sessions that you want to be HyperSwap capable together. And so for the example below, I showed I set 2 different sessions, one MM and one multi-target MMGM, but I set the consistency group name for the H1, H2 role pair, which is the Metro Mirror role pair, to my HyperSwap. So what we do with that is we will, once both sessions are ready to load a configuration, which means all Metro Mirror pairs are duplex or prepared in CSM terms across both sessions, we will see that they are tied together, and we will load a configuration to ZOS that contains all the Metro Mirror pairs in both those sessions. So now ZOS doesn't really know, all it knows is that my HyperSwap name, and it will, and you'll see that when you when you query on the ZOS system, you'll see that my HyperSwap name. But you'll now, from the ZOS perspective, it's managing all those pairs together. If a suspend event occurs, it'll handle it. If a HyperSwap event occurs, it'll handle it across both. And both sessions on the CSM side will be alerted and handle it accordingly. So this not only covers HyperSwap, but it also covers hardened freeze. So as you know, we have both a HyperSwap, which if there's a primary I/O error, will automatically swap to the secondary. But we also have the hardened freeze option, which if you don't want a HyperSwap, you can still load the Metro Mirror configuration onto ZOS so that ZOS will process any suspend events and freeze thaw accordingly. So you can set up multiple sessions for Metro Mirror and hardened freeze capabilities. Now, we didn't stop there, so we figured there are cases where you don't have HyperSwap and you don't have hardened freeze. You might just be in a normal environment running CSM on a distributed server, don't really care about either of those. Well, you can still set this consistency group name, and what we will do is on a suspend of any of the sessions, we will freeze across both those sessions. So why would you use this? There have been cases where I've seen where customers ask, they have an asymmetrical configuration like this, but they want the Metro Mirror pairs to be consistent in the event of the suspension by error or by command. And so you could set this up and set the consistency group name, And now with a simple suspend command, CSM will do that freeze across all before it does any thaws. All right, so let me just make it a little clearer. Let me show you here in our GUI, give you a live demo. So I'm going to filter on HyperSwap. So now I see all my HyperSwap sessions. I am going to show you that if I go into the view, set consistency group name, you'll see my HyperSwap there. And if I go into the properties, you'll see that this is manage H1 and H2 with HyperSwap. So HyperSwap's enabled, and the sysplex on this one is capcan1. If I go to this other one, you'll see the same thing, manage HyperSwap capcan1. Now I'm going to start this one, but I'm going to start in GC mode just to show you something first. So start GC. All the pairs will start just in GC mode. It's not going to be ready to load a configuration because we don't load a configuration until we're prepared. But then I'm going to start this session. I'm going to just start the Metro Mirror lathe, but I'm going to start it in Metro Mirror mode. So remember, both sessions have my HyperSwap set as the consistency group name. So now they're starting. In a second here, that one will go into a prepared state. So there you go. See, AKMMGM is prepared. However, you see a warning. Why do you see that warning? So I'm going to drill in, and you'll actually see that there's another warning message here now. And what it says is that this session did not load a configuration because one or more sessions of the same consistency group name are not ready to load a configuration. What does this mean? Well, it means that you, as a user, have defined both these sessions to be HyperSwap capable, and they're both running. However, AKMM, this is my Metro Mirror session, he is not ready to load a configuration yet. So we will not do the load yet. Why do we choose it to do this way? Because we figured that if you're tying these sessions together, you don't want a swap to occur on the AKMM GM session and without the swap happening in the AKMM session. You're going to get into a confused environment where you have some of the host writing to some of the volumes on the original site and some to the other site. And so we wait until the second session is fully prepared as well. So I'm going to go and start it in MM mode now. Now you see they both go prepared, normal, and now I will talk about this later, but you can actually see that it's HyperSwap capable from the session overview panel, and you'll see that there's the HyperSwap overlay on the session details. Just to show you, I'm going to go into the console, and you'll see there is a My HyperSwap. This is the name I supplied it. It's My HyperSwap, just so you can see My HyperSwap. So that's the configuration we loaded. And there's the configuration. So this configuration has 2 volumes in it, and each of my sessions has 1 copy set. So you can see that, so 1 copy set each. So it loaded those volumes across both the sessions. So now what happens if I terminate one of the sessions? So let me terminate the AKMMGM session. This is going to remove the MM pairs from the hardware. But before it does that, it will actually load a new configuration onto ZOS that only contains the single volume. So we didn't have to purge, we just reload a new configuration, and now HyperSwap and ZOS are only managing that single volume. Now, of course, if I was to terminate the second session, you will see that we purge the configuration and there's nothing on HyperSwap anymore. All right, and let me just quickly show you an actual swap. So I'm going to start these guys up again. And now you'll see they're both prepared and HyperSwap's loaded on both of those sessions. So if I was to issue a HyperSwap to the MM session now, click Commands, HyperSwap. Are you sure you want to do this? It's going to switch the sites. I say yes. And you'll notice HyperSwap from the console, all the HyperSwap messages, swapping, doing its job. And from the CSM side, you'll see that both sessions went target available, and now the active host site is site 2. So both, with one single command, both sessions swapped. All right. So hopefully that explains this new feature. I think it's going to be a big one that a lot of customers have been asking for, and hopefully it'll help out. All right, so our next one I want to talk about is our support for installing CSM on Windows 2016 servers. Now, our code really doesn't matter. The Java sort of supported it. However, we build our installer on Install Anywhere, and the older version on that we were using did not support Windows 2016 yet. So we had to upgrade that, and now we do support Windows 2016. So if you have a configuration where you do want to install on Windows 2016, you will need the 6.2.0 version of CSM. Alright, next feature is the support to download global mirror statistics CSV file via remote CLI connection. Alright, so what is this one? This one is, we had a CLI command already, the export GM data, that creates the CSV file. However, that CLI command, all it does is it causes the creation of the file to happen on the CSM server. Well, if you're running CSM on the HMC, well, you can't get to it because you can't get to the operating system. Another case is where their customers wanted to script the extraction, so they have a remote server. They wanted to use the CLI to, on a regular basis, on some schedule, invoke it and extract it so that they could look at the data. And so we're hoping this covers both those cases now. Now what we did was add a -dir parm on the export GM data. It's an optional parm, but if you use it, what you'll do is specify the file system location, and not only will the file get created, but it will offload that file for you to the operating system which the CSM CLI is running on, and you can then do what you need to do. Okay, next one is our improvements in the Remove Copy Set wizard, thus allowing filtering, sorting, and removal via CSV file. So there were not a lot of customers. We haven't made many. We've made improvements in our Add Copy Set wizard, but we haven't made many improvements in Remove Copy Set. And so there were customers that they go through it, and all we used to have was a drop down, so you had to select them onesie twosie in order to choose your copy sets. Well, what they really wanted was a table where they could control click, shift click, multi-filter, sort, all that stuff. And so that's what we did. We implemented a table within the Remove Copy Set wizard. This table allows you to do those shift click, control click options. You can sort by either username or the full name, so any user-defined name on the volume or the full name that is specified using the box LSS and volume number. Or you can even filter on a particular name if you're looking for one and select that. In addition, we've added a little checkbox right below that table that allows you to use a CSV file to do the removal. So that CSV file can be the same format as your Add Copy Set. We already have the CSV import option in the Add Copy Set wizard. Well, this is the same thing. You can use that same format and specify that CSV file so that if there's a set of volumes in a session where you're regularly adding and removing, this will definitely help. You can specify that CSV file and we'll do the removal on those. Right, so in terms of removing the Remove Copy Set wizard, we did make some actual performance improvements as well. So what happened previously is even though you selected a group, multiple copy sets in the wizard, under the covers we would actually issue the removes serially, so one at a time. In a DS8000 global mirror environment in particular, this could take quite a while. Each of those removes had to remove the volume from the LSS session, which didn't happen until the CG was formed, and so each of the removes could take, depending on consistency group formation time, could take seconds, and so that added up if you're removing hundreds of volumes, hundreds of copy sets. And so what we've done is made a change so that internally what the code will do is we'll group them by the LSS pairings, and thus we will issue a single command for all the copy sets at a time at an LSS level in order to do the removal. This has drastically improved the performance on Remove Copy Set. So if you've in the past had problems where Remove Copy Set's taken minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, etc., because you're doing a large set, this should help you out tremendously, and it should be going a lot faster. Alright, so here's another big one. So the ability to edit the port pairing CSV file and the CSM GUI. So we have a just to rehash it, we do DS8000 in order to do replication requires replication paths, logical paths to be set up. So we have this port pairing file that you can define on the operating system that whenever CSM does a start command, it needs to establish pairs on the DS8000. We will look at that file and establish, if defined, and establish the paths using the port pairings defined in that file. Problem came when we loaded CSM on an HMC. Well, again, you don't have access to the operating system, so there's no way to update that file or add in that information. So how do we get around that? We added this in our GUI from the paths drop down in the navigator at the top of the screen. You can actually say paths and then DS8000 port pairing CSV, and that's going to take you to the screen thing like the screenshot that you're seeing on the screen right now. It works a lot like the LDAP configuration wizard I talked about before. You can see the contents of the port pairing CSV file within the GUI. You can click on Edit. You can modify the file. The file contains samples of what to do because we have various formats you can use based off of what you want to do. And that port pairing CSV file, once you save it, will then is now saved on the operating system, including when CSM is running on the HMC, and you are good to go. So hopefully this helps out tremendously, not only in the CSM running on the HMC case, but just in configurations in general. Customers, again, don't have to go to the operating system. They can go straight to our GUI and see what's defined and set it up that way. Alright, next one is the ability to set a property for multi-target sessions to support Remote Pair FlashCopy, also called the Preserve Mirror feature on DS8000. And what this is if you have a multi-target relationship, so you have one source volume going to multiple targets, but on that source volume you want to set up this Remote Pair FlashCopy, Preserve Mirror. Well, the hardware doesn't know which of the PPRC relationships to use in the multi-target relationship, so you actually have to tell it which to use. Well, CSM did, although we supported multi-target, didn't have a way to define which of the pairs to use. So what we did was add in a property that you can specify on the ARM server.properties file, that if you define the session name and role pair during the establish, right after we establish the pair, we will call the set PPRC characteristics command on those pairs for the role pair, so that it tells the DS8000 these pairs are the ones that should be used for any Remote Pair FlashCopy relationships. Now, with that said, we don't have anywhere to remove it, so you will have to go to the DSCLI to remove it for now. However, this is a first step just to try to get the feature out there for customers that might find they need it. Alright, next feature is our support for restoring DS8000 FlashCopy sessions. So we've had support for FlashCopy for a long time now. However, what we haven't had is the ability to restore a FlashCopy session. So now in 6.2 we actually provide a restore command. So after you've done a flash, the session goes into that target available state. So as long as the relationships are persistent, you can actually now issue that restore, and we will reverse the direction of that FlashCopy so that your source is now overridden with whatever was on that target volume, and now you've restored the volume. Once restored, you can then reflash back the other way. So hopefully this helps out. There's been a number of requests lately for this particular feature all of a sudden, but we threw it in there for the DS8000 side. Hopefully we'll get to SVC and XIV. Well, XIV is done differently, but SVC-based systems shortly. But for now, we do have the DS8000 support. All right, next we have the display HyperSwap hardened free status and current active site name on the session overview panel. So I actually kind of talked about this already. I actually showed you an example when we started HyperSwap. But we now have two new columns. I'll start with those for HyperSwap and hardened freeze. This tells you whether a session, for the HyperSwap, tells you whether a session is HyperSwap capable, or on the hardened freeze tells you whether hardened freeze is enabled. So just talk about what it is. For the HyperSwap column, if you haven't specified HyperSwap option on the session, it'll remain blank, won't show you anything. If you have specified it but there's no configuration, you'll see no. If it has specified it and we've loaded a configuration, you'll see yes. And then lastly, if we've loaded a configuration but it's actually disabled currently, then we'll show the disabled in that column. For the hardened freeze, it's basically the same, just not the disabled, so blank, no, or yes, you'll see based off of what you set in the properties. And then the other column we've added is active site. So we've already had the active production role, but there were customers that said they wanted to actually see the site name that they've configured. So whether it be, say, New Jersey or New York, if they define site 1 as New Jersey or site 2 as New York, they wanted to see that actually on the session overview panel. And so we've added the active site column, and so now you can actually see that. All right, so next is our update to our session dynamic picture images. So you'll see that we refreshed the images. They're a little flatter now, a little more modern in terms of the dynamic pictures. That's the picture that actually depicts where the replication is going. But part of this was also trying to update and make it clearer the difference between a global copy and the global mirror. So previously, whenever you had global copy or global mirror, you would see that filled-in arrow with an overlay of the little globe, just like you see in this bottom right picture. There's a little globe there. Both global copy and global mirror had that overlay, and so you never were sure just by looking at the dynamic picture what was being used. So now what we have is, if there's a global copy relationship going between sites, you will see that dashed line. As you can see, this dashed arrow is pointing between site 1 and site 3 in your lower left-hand picture. That is what we would now indicate a global copy relationship. Whereas if you go into global mirror relationship, that's the bottom right picture, you'll see a dashed line still, and that's because there's global copy going between, but you will also see the overlay for the globe indicating that between the sites a global mirror relationship is established as well. Alright, and our last feature here is that I want to tell you about is that when you purchase CSM with a ZOS license, either the basic or the full license, you actually can download the DSCLI for ZOS package. So it's shipped in the bundle with CSM, and that allows you to install DSCLI on a ZOS system. We have updated that version of the DSCLI in 6.2 to the 7.8.22.87 version of the DSCLI. So if you need an upgrade to your DSCLI on ZOS, you can pull this from 6.2. Alright, with that, I hope you see that we've put in a lot of work. 6.2 is a big release for us, a lot of new features, again, a lot of customer requested features. So Please provide any feedback as usual. Here are some links that you can get to for the support panel, etc. And as well as our RFE community where you can open up any additional requests. Thank you for your time, and hope you enjoy our Copy Services Manager 6.2.0 release.